By late 2025, China took an action that American strategists had long feared but hoped would never materialize, an action that fundamentally altered the military balance in the Western Pacific. It was an action that left the United States with no viable options because every potential response either failed to resolve the problem or made it worse. Chinese forces were deployed to disputed islands in the South China Sea claimed by the Philippines. This was not limited to naval patrols or military exercises in the surrounding waters. This was a full deployment, troops on the ground, weapons systems installed, and infrastructure constructed on islands that the Philippines, a U.S. treaty ally, considers sovereign territory. Unlike the artificial islands China had previously built on reefs already under its control, these were genuinely contested features. These were islands the Philippines had occupied or claimed without significant challenge until China moved its forces there. By late 2025, the precise islands involved had not been publicly confirmed, as both China and the United States sought to manage the crisis quietly. Nonetheless, intelligence assessments and regional reports indicated that Chinese military presence had been established on at least 2 disputed features in the Spratly Islands claimed by the Philippines. This situation represented a clear red line. The United States has maintained a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines since 1951, obligating it to defend the country against armed attack. If Chinese military occupation of Philippine-claimed territory qualifies as such an attack, the United States is treaty-bound to respond. Yet every response option available to Washington is deeply problematic. A military response would involve war with China over small, remote islands most Americans could not locate on a map. The risk of escalation into a broader conflict, potentially involving nuclear weapons, is intolerable. Consequently, a military response is essentially off the table unless the U.S. is willing to risk global war over disputed rocks in the South China Sea. Diplomatic protests without the backing of force expose the weaknesses of American mutual defense commitments. If the United States will not defend a treaty ally when China seizes its territory, the treaty becomes largely symbolic. Every other Asian ally is watching. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan all question whether Washington would intervene if China challenged their territories. If the answer appears to be no, alliances begin to unravel. Economic measures, meanwhile, present equally unattractive consequences. The U.S. economy is deeply integrated with China, and sanctions would inflict serious damage on both sides. China would retaliate against American companies and assets, turning economic conflict into mutual destruction. Doing nothing and accepting the reality on the ground would be an admission that American power in the Western Pacific is insufficient to prevent Chinese actions, effectively recognizing Chinese regional dominance and signaling the decline of American primacy in Asia. Every response is fraught with risk. War could destroy alliances, economic warfare would be mutually destructive, and inaction concedes defeat. China engineered a situation in which the United States must choose between catastrophic war, economic self-harm, or acceptance of strategic loss. By late 2025, Washington was paralyzed because each option carried significant downside. When an adversary creates circumstances in which all your options are terrible and inaction seems the least bad choice, it constitutes strategic checkmate. China maneuvered the United States into precisely such a position. By deploying forces to Philippine-claimed territory, Beijing left Washington with no good responses. Military action risks catastrophic war. Diplomatic protest without force reveals treaty commitments are hollow. Economic sanctions would trigger mutually destructive outcomes. Acceptance signals U.S. weakness in Asia. Every option exposes a vulnerability, and every ally observes the result, recalculating their own security strategies. The red line China crossed is not about the islands themselves, but about proving that American mutual defense commitments in Asia are unenforceable when the adversary is willing to challenge them. China deliberately chose islands claimed by the Philippines because the move maximizes the strategic dilemma. Defending them requires war over territory of minimal American interest, while not defending them undermines treaty credibility. By late 2025, China had created this dilemma intentionally, correctly calculating that the United States would avoid military confrontation. The U.S. response, limited to diplomatic protests, confirmed Beijing's assessment. Chinese forces arrived quietly, without announcements, press conferences, or declarations. Ships delivered personnel and equipment, construction began, radar installations were set up, and by the time external observers verified the deployment, the presence was established. The Philippines detected the deployment, protested, issued demands for withdrawal, and conducted observation flights. It invoked the U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty, requesting American support. The United States responded with diplomatic statements condemning China and calls for de-escalation. But no military action occurred. No forces moved to confront Chinese troops, and no ultimatums were issued. Regional observers, from Japanese analysts to South Korean officials, noted Washington's restraint. Taiwanese strategists calculated what this meant for their own security. By late 2025, the pattern was undeniable. China deployed forces, the Philippines protested, Washington protested diplomatically, but Chinese forces remained on the islands. The strategic fatality was complete. The red line had been crossed. Every American response option is deeply flawed. Military action could involve deploying naval forces, conducting airstrikes on Chinese installations, or attempting to retake the islands via ground operations. Yet these actions would not be a limited engagement. They would risk a direct war with China. Once combat begins, escalation is almost inevitable. China possesses nuclear weapons and the conventional capacity to strike U.S. bases in the region. Conflict could spread rapidly to Taiwan and across the broader Pacific, with the potential to escalate to nuclear exchange, all triggered by small islands of minimal strategic value. Explaining such a war to the American public would be politically impossible. The military option, while theoretically available, is effectively impractical because the risk-to-benefit ratio is catastrophic. America will not initiate a global-scale conflict over Philippine-claimed islands in the Spratlys. China understood this. When selecting the targets, this choice created the maximum dilemma. Treaty obligations dictate defending the ally, while strategic reality renders war over these stakes unacceptable. Diplomatic action is similarly ineffective. Washington can issue protests, rally international opinion, bring the matter to the United Nations, or coordinate allied statements. China can ignore these actions. Its forces remain, consolidating positions and infrastructure. Diplomacy without military enforcement is symbolic, incapable of reversing Chinese control. Each passing day underscores the impotence of statements without force. America's treaties are revealed to be unenforceable. China can act, America can protest, and yet the physical occupation remains unchanged. This undermines alliance credibility. U.S. commitments appear conditional, enforceable only when conflicts are low risk. Economic responses are similarly fraught. Sanctions targeting Chinese companies, trade, or financial assets would inflict pain on the U.S. as well due to the depth of economic integration. China could retaliate, restricting exports, targeting U.S. agricultural products, or applying pressure in global markets. Economic warfare would escalate costs on both sides without dislodging Chinese forces. America would suffer without achieving strategic objectives, while China endures the costs because territorial control holds greater importance than short-term economic pain. Acceptance, the final option, amounts to tacit acknowledgement of defeat. Washington maintains formal diplomatic engagement, reassures Manila privately, and avoids confrontation, all while China consolidates gains. The American deterrent in the South China Sea is revealed to be hollow. Chinese regional dominance is tacitly accepted. Every ally notices. Japan questions whether the United States would defend the Senkaku Islands under similar conditions. South Korea questions the reliability of its security guarantees. Taiwan faces a stark lesson. If the U.S. will not defend the Philippines over small islands, could Taiwan expect intervention if faced with Chinese aggression? Alliance structures do not collapse through formal withdrawal, but through the revealed irrelevance of treaty guarantees. American commitments appear conditional to the point of meaninglessness. The options available are war, ineffective protests, mutual economic destruction, or tacit acceptance. China created a situation in which all options are unpalatable. By late 2025, the United States effectively chose the least damaging option: restrained diplomacy coupled with private assurances. Chinese forces remain on the islands, and American response is limited to protests. The strategic checkmate is complete. This development has cascading implications for American alliances in Asia. Japan, with territorial disputes over the Senkaku Islands, assumed U.S. defense under treaty obligations. Yet if Washington will not defend Philippine Islands, Japan's confidence in American commitments declines. Japanese defense planning shifts toward independent capabilities, and discussions of advanced strike systems or nuclear hedging increase. South Korea similarly recalculates. Its security depends on U.S. commitment against North Korea, yet the conditionality revealed in the Philippines situation prompts more autonomous defense planning, coordination with Japan, and consideration of advanced military options. Taiwan, most directly affected, accelerates its military buildup, invests in asymmetric capabilities, and prepares for the possibility of defending itself independently, calculating that American support may be limited. China's choice of timing for this deployment reflects strategic calculation. It could have seized these islands years earlier, but factors converged in late 2025. U.S. domestic politics were deeply divided, with the Trump administration reprioritizing foreign policy in transactional terms and placing less emphasis on alliances. Global crises, from Ukraine to the Middle East, occupied American attention. Chinese anti-access capabilities had matured, increasing the risk to U.S. forces operating near China. Domestically, Chinese leadership faced minimal opposition, nationalism was high, and the economy was stable enough to tolerate international pushback. International support for American enforcement was limited due to global dependence on Chinese trade. Beijing assessed that U.S. response would be weakest at this moment, a calculation that proved correct. The strategic objective extended beyond the islands themselves. China demonstrated its ability to alter facts on the ground in disputed areas claimed by a U.S. ally without provoking military intervention. This is a demonstration of power and a test of American resolve. The demonstration matters more than the geographic or military value of the islands. China is establishing a new precedent. Disputed territory can be occupied incrementally without triggering U.S. military response. Each slice of territory is insufficient to provoke war, but accumulated gains enable de facto control. This salami slicing strategy is already proving effective. The broader implications for U.S. power in Asia are stark. American influence historically relied on military superiority and a network of credible alliances. China's action and Washington's response exposed weaknesses in both. Close to China, intervention is costly and risky. Alliances are less reliable as confidence in U.S. commitment declines. Allies hedge and pursue independent capabilities, while Washington's ability to project power diminishes. China's carefully calibrated action on Philippine-claimed islands shows that U.S. forces may be insufficient to prevent territorial advances when Beijing is willing to risk confrontation. By late 2025, the red line had been crossed. China's power move left the United States with no good options. Diplomatic protests accompany tacit acceptance of Chinese control. Alliances in Asia are not formally abandoned but have been revealed as conditionally enforceable. Every ally watches and recalculates. U.S. influence is eroding incrementally, not through dramatic defeat, but through a sequence of unchallenged actions that expose the limits of American will. China demonstrated that American power in the Western Pacific is insufficient to prevent its expansion short of direct attacks on U.S. forces. U.S. willingness to defend allies is conditional, and treaties are effectively meaningless when tested. The strategic checkmate is complete. China has engineered a situation in which every American response is costly, dangerous, or humiliating. The United States chose the least bad option, yet that choice itself signals declining American power while Chinese influence ascends. By late 2025, the red line is crossed, the power move is fully realized, and U.S. options are exhausted. When a treaty ally is attacked and the response is limited to diplomatic protests because actual defense would be too costly, the message is clear. American alliances in Asia are weakened, and the region's strategic calculations are being fundamentally reshaped.